If your child is dealing with eczema, food reactions, or environmental allergies, and you're ready to stop guessing and start getting some real answers, I want to tell you about something exciting. Our 12-week eczema and allergy program is now open for enrollment inside the Natural Super Kids Club. Over 12 weeks, we guide you through exactly what's driving your child's reactivity and how to support their gut health, immune system, and skin from the inside out. It's structured, practical, and designed to fit real family life. There are 2 ways to join. We have a self-guided option or a fully supported option with personalized one-on-one consultations if you'd like practitioner support tailored specifically to your child. But enrollment is only open for a short time. We're closing the doors on Sunday. Head to naturalsuperkids.com/join to see everything that's included, or send us a DM on Instagram with the word program and we'll send you the link directly. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to dive into today's podcast episode on microbiome testing, and specifically, I want to talk about why, or help you understand that most microbiome tests for kids are being misinterpreted and what you need to know about this as a parent. So this is going to be helpful if you've had a microbiome test done on your child to help understand the results a little better, and also maybe sort of sift through some of the advice you might have been given by practitioners that have done microbiome testing. So recently, the team of practitioners here at Natural Super Kids did a mentoring program on Paediatric microbiome, and it was fascinating because there's a lot that we don't know about the pediatric microbiome and how microbiome testing for kids can be interpreted correctly. And so we learned a lot, and I wanted to bring some of this information that is relevant for parents to this episode. So you've probably seen microbiome testing being advertised a lot, by practitioners, by some, testing companies themselves, that some of them you can order direct, and more families than ever are getting their child's gut microbiome tested, thinking about it, or asking questions about it. We are certainly having a lot of inquiries about microbiome testing, and yes, we love microbiome testing for kids, but I do want to talk about some of the limitations. And the mentoring that we did, it was actually led by Dr. Brad Leech. We've had him on the podcast before. He is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the gut microbiome. He's very... he just loves nothing more than delving into the research. So it was really great to learn from him. I could tell by listening to him, he had, done a lot of research and put together some really helpful information for practitioners, and it was a really popular program. There were a lot of practitioners in this mentoring program. What we sort of saw from, I guess, listening to the information in the mentoring program, but also hearing some of the questions and some of the advice and some of the conversations that were had within these mentoring sessions is, I guess it helped us to see how much we really know about implementing changes when it comes to children in terms of, supplements that have good compliance, not just supplements, but any sort of dietary suggestions or lifestyle suggestions and what we can realistically expect when it comes to children. A lot of practitioners that were part of the mentoring session, wanted to know more about pediatric microbiome health, but weren't necessarily very experienced or knowledgeable in kids' health in general. So it gave us a really lovely feeling of really how much we know from all of the knowledge and experience we have working with kids and just being completely, obsessed with learning as much as we can about children's health and children's gut health as well. So the problem isn't microbiome testing, it is the interpretation of these tests that can be a problem. And as I said, we are always keen to learn more. We learned a lot in this mentoring program that made us even more, confident to recommend microbiome testing for kids because there are certain limitations. And one of the things that I cringe at is seeing either practitioners or microbiome testing companies, advertising microbiome testing as in it's helpful for everyone, or marketing packages where you get a microbiome test and interpretation of that test without a practitioner actually knowing the full picture of what is going on with that child. So it really confirmed that the way that we approach microbiome testing is we're very confident in that, more confident than ever in that, in terms of we don't, prescribe or refer for microbiome testing. Refer is the right word, not prescribe, until we've had an initial consultation with a family. And we understand that can be frustrating and it's another step and it's more cost, but it's really important to know the details and the history and the presenting picture of a child so that we can interpret that test best. Because without any background knowledge to just say, right, here's the test and this is what it means, that is not a correct way of interpreting a microbiome test. It really needs to be interpreted with the child's health picture, health history, symptom picture in mind. It really, that is really important for various reasons. And the other thing that is important is that results should not be interpreted through an adult lens. And the majority of the research that is done on the gut microbiome is done on adults. There's so much more that needs to be done on children. And even when we get a microbiome test result back, the reference ranges are based on healthy adults, not on healthy children. So if you're interpreting that yourself, or a practitioner that is not knowledgeable on the pediatric microbiome, that can really be, you can be given some advice that is unnecessary or incorrect. So we really need to be ignoring those reference ranges that are coming up on a microbiome test and looking at it in line with that particular child, and really importantly, the child's age as well. Because the thing with pediatric microbiomes or children's microbiomes is that they change from year to year. And in those early years, really the microbiome is changing from month to month. And what is considered healthy in a 6-month-old is very different to what is considered healthy in a 2-year-old, for example. So it really needs to be looked at in terms of the child's age, and also things like, for babies, are they being breastfed or are they on solids yet? Are they being breastfed or formula fed? Those things make a big difference to how their microbiome is presenting and what is healthy. So hopefully that makes sense, but it's really important that we're looking at a microbiome test with a particular child's history in mind and presenting health picture in mind, and that it is being looked at correctly for their age and healthy ranges for that age, which is not, unfortunately, free information to all practitioners that are referring tests for children. And it can lead to expensive protocols or unnecessary dietary restrictions if these tests are not being interpreted correctly. So that's what I want to really talk about in this episode. So let's talk a little bit about why a child's microbiome is fundamentally different to an adult's microbiome. As I said, most microbiome research is done in adults. And the age bracket between 3 and 12 years is the most understudied group. A child's microbiome is meant to look different to an adult's. Healthy adult reference ranges are not applicable or appropriate to be looked at in terms of a child's microbiome. So one example is children, particularly young children, have much more bifidobacterium within their microbiome than adults do. So if we're looking at an adult reference range and being like, wow, there are a lot of bifidobacterium in this microbiome, that is completely normal for a child and completely normal for a younger child. And that is just one example. So comparing a child's results to an adult reference range or adult reference ranges and saying that a child has dysbiosis or leaky gut is a really common and significant error. And it can lead to unnecessary supplementation and unnecessary, dietary advice or dietary restriction. The other really big difference when it comes to children's microbiome as opposed to adults' microbiome is that microbiome diversity, so the range and variety of species within the microbiome, is naturally lower in children than it is in adults. And we talk often on this podcast about the importance of microbiome diversity. But what is healthy in an adult is very different than in a child. And low diversity in a 2-year-old, for example, if we're comparing it with what's healthy in an adult, is not necessarily a problem. So we need to be looking at the what is normal or healthy in microbiome diversity in particular age brackets, which is something we gained a lot of knowledge in this mentoring program. And the other thing to know, and you may have heard about this before, is the first 1,000 days, so essentially the first 3 years of a child's life, are such an important window of microbiome development. The gut rapidly matures in the first 3 years, and it only stabilizes into adult-like patterns after those 3 years. And it's still very changeable up until sort of 12 years old. But those first, if we're getting microbiome testing done on a child younger than 3, we really need to be interpreting those test results very differently than we would an adult's microbiome. So that's really important to know. I want to talk about a couple of markers that are very different in children than they are in adults. To give you some examples, now some of these words, I'm going to try and explain this as simply as possible. So I want to start by talking about zonulin. Now, if you've had a microbiome test done on your child, you might want to grab that out and have a look at it and have a look at, what their zonulin is. And this might make a bit more sense. But put simply, zonulin is a protein and it regulates the permeability of the intestinal barrier. So it modulates the tight junctions between the cells of the intestinal wall. So it's often looked at in terms of indicating leaky gut or intestinal permeability, which is often diagnosed incorrectly based on zonulin levels and other factors or markers within a microbiome test. So in an adult, if they have elevated zonulin, so high zonulin levels in a microbiome test in an adult, we could safely, we can safely say that they have some degree of leaky gut or intestinal permeability. And this is often linked with things like food sensitivities, inflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases, and is really common. But it's poorly validated in children under 12, and there's no pediatric reference ranges that exist. So a high zonulin result in a child under 12 does not mean leaky gut, and it should not be used to drive dietary restriction or supplement protocols in children, but it frequently is by practitioners. So if you've been told that your child has high zonulin, therefore they have leaky gut, therefore they need to be put on this gut healing protocol, then that is potentially incorrect. And in the results of high zonulin or in a microbiome test result, it will often say, increased permeability. And that is an adult-derived interpretation. It should not be applied to children. So that's one example. So you can see where, there can be real confusion here. And look, practitioners that are potentially interpreting these test results incorrectly, they're not doing it on purpose. They're just not, they don't have the knowledge to interpret these correctly for children. And as I said, our knowledge has really expanded and improved since doing this gut microbiome mentoring program, as well as, our own research into gut microbiome health for children as well. So the second example I want to talk about is secretory IgA. So secretory IgA, it's a class of antibodies that's found in mucosal secretions. So things like the gut, the respiratory tract, and secretory IgA, it's an immune compound. So it acts as the first line of defense against things like toxins and viruses and bacteria. Secretory IgA can help prevent pathogens from adhering to epithelial surfaces like the gut wall or respiratory cells. And so high levels of secretory IgA indicate inflammation, whereas low levels suggest like immune deficiency or, sometimes chronic stress. So secretory IgA in adult test results, high can mean that there's inflammation going on, and low can mean that there's a bit of an immune deficiency. There's other things that it can mean as well, but that's just put sort of really simply. But secretory IgA is highly variable in children, and it's really strongly impacted by breastfeeding and immune maturation. So as the immune system is maturing, secretory IgA levels, it's normal for them to be out of adult healthy ranges. And when children are breastfed, secretory IgA levels can be really high. So that doesn't necessarily mean there's inflammation. It can just mean that that's normal for that particular child in terms of them potentially breastfeeding or being in a stage of, immune development or immune maturation. So secretory IgA levels should not be used to justify, again, supplement protocols or dietary restrictions in children. It's definitely a marker that we can take into consideration, but we need to look at that child as a whole. It's not a standalone clinical indicator in children. And then I also talked about those microbiome diversity scores. So when you get a microbiome test result back, it often gives you either, healthy microbiome diversity score, down to low, but it's normal for children to score low in their microbiome diversity compared to adult reference points. And remember that when we are looking at a microbiome test result, the reference ranges are in adult healthy reference ranges. So a low microbiome diversity score in a 3-year-old does not mean that their gut is unhealthy. It could be very much healthy for their age. And that's where working with practitioners that are knowledgeable in pediatric reference ranges is really important. Do not look at your child's microbiome diversity score in a gut microbiome test and see that it's in the red range, it's unhealthy, it's low, and think that that's a problem. It needs to be looked at for their age particularly. And unfortunately here in Australia, there really isn't a good microbiome test. And I'll get into, differences in microbiome testing that states things in children's reference ranges. So it can be really confusing to get all of these red flags back in a microbiome test, but actually everything is okay based on your child's age, their lifestyle, what they're eating, those sorts of things. So the type of microbiome testing you have is really important as well. So we love the Microbiome tests here at Natural Super Kids. They use something called shotgun metagenomics. It's the current gold standard for microbiome testing, and it's far more clinically detailed and accurate than other ways of testing, such as older, RNA testing. And there's some other different ways that microbiome testing can be done as well. So the technology used in microbiome testing is important to be looking at. And so that is why the only gut microbiome tests that we refer for now are the Microba gut microbiome tests. So as I said, microbiome testing can be really helpful for kids. There are definitely some limitations, particularly in younger children. But it is important that your gut microbiome tests for your kids are being interpreted correctly. And some of the information in this episode may have gone over your head in terms of you being a parent and not a practitioner, but I did think it was important to talk to some of these points to make sure that parents are aware. So if you are seeing a practitioner or getting a gut microbiome test done for your child, make sure you're asking them, are these reference ranges and is this protocol appropriate for my child? You specifically want to ask, are the reference ranges that you're looking at validated for my child's age? And remember those couple of examples that I shared with you, zonulin and secretory IgA. These isolated markers should not be used as basis for protocols in children under 12. So that's something you can potentially question your practitioner on if they are being used, as the basis of gut healing protocols, for example. Really important to understand that low diversity in young children does not necessarily mean that they have dysbiosis or that they have an unhealthy gut microbiome. Your child's age matters hugely when it comes to the healthy range, reference range for gut microbiome diversity that you should be looking at for them. So if you are interested in gut microbiome testing, please reach out to us. The first step always is to book an appointment, an initial appointment. If you're already a client, you definitely can talk to your practitioner about referring for gut microbiome testing. I do want to talk about this a little bit more and, some different topics in relation to gut microbiome testing. We didn't get into, pathogens and parasites. So that's something that, would be really helpful for us to talk about at some point on the podcast as well. But please reach out to us, support@naturalsuperkids.com. Send us a DM on Instagram over at Natural Super Kids. I'd love to know if you found this episode helpful, and we can definitely support you with interpreting gut microbiome testing for children and referring for testing where appropriate as well. The other thing is it's not always the best test for every child. We are definitely not practitioners that think every child should have a gut microbiome test. But, it can be really interesting to have a look at what their gut microbiome is saying and what is coming up in there, but really important that it is being interpreted correctly. I think I have made my point in this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.